Shoots and Ladders, Vince McMahon Netflix documentary recap. Hey everyone, my name is Jason.
I'm Desiree Josen.
Okay, this is the hottest talking point right now in pro wrestling. The Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix just came out. We're going to go ahead and run through this. There's a lot of talking points. It's definitely intriguing, that's for sure. All right, what are your initial thoughts before we go segment by segment?
I love these. I love these kind of documentaries. I watch them over and over. And since it's been out, I've already watched it twice. And I'm just so intrigued by the stories. And I thought it was great. I think it's great timing to introduce the Netflix viewers to what WWE is before they launch their
Yeah,
full takeover. So I think this is great and perfect timing.
absolutely. 100% with you on that. I definitely think it's just perfect timing. They're obviously going to roll out Raw in January, so the timing is impeccable. So, first segment we're going to talk about is young Vince and Vince McMahon Sr. So, on the initial, if you're on the outside looking in, you probably assume that Vince McMahon Jr. just took over the company. That's actually not the case. It almost sounds like his relationship with his father was a little tumultuous.
Mhm.
Definitely, it was not as smooth of a transition to kind of pass down one to another. He bought out his dad, basically had a completely different vision for what wrestling should be. They talked about in depth the territory situation, which I thought was brilliant because that's very important. A lot of people don't
Mhm.
realize is before cable television, wrestling was on the local channels. Down here in South Florida, like the My TV 33 or local stations. When my parents first moved to New York, they had it on Channel 2, and it was only like a half hour segments. And whatever region you were in, you only
Mhm.
got to see a certain amount of wrestlers. So New York was obviously the bigger one, but then you had Mid Atlantic and you had San Francisco and Portland and what have you. Now, when cable television came out, it was very revolutionary. It's the equivalent of what streaming is now when it first came out. Now you can broadcast to anyone as long as you have internet. Well, back then, not everyone had cable per se, but once Vince kind of saw the future and said, "Hey, wait, this is the next revolutionary tactic, if you will, when it comes to television." So him buying out his father was absolutely brilliant, and I'm really glad they brought that up.
Oh yeah. Like 100%. I'm glad they touched on it. And I, and I think that's what a lot of people assume when they don't know the backstory events is they just assume that he just inherited and took over daddy's company. That was not the case because his relationship with his dad was not a normal one.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's similar to other people's stories, but he mentioned how he got a later step in his relationship with him when he was like a preteen and then ended up for it was kind of sad to hear it to that he was basically just constantly trying to prove himself for his father's love and respect and that's all he wanted. But I mean it really created that work ethic of him
sure.
and completely changed the face of the business. So he was just so driven to be like, I see the growth of this. I see what the future, and it's not going to be the good old boy thing where we stay in our territories, we stay in our states, and that's it. He took complete control and he built a brand. He is the foundation of
Sure.
what wrestling is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of add on that, I think a lot of recognition needs to be given to the USA Network because
Mhm.
when it comes to what cable television, the USA Network really said okay. And remember, yeah, there was some interest in wrestling because the territory was just discussed, but for them to agree to a weekly program show, they were taking a chance. And
Yeah, it was
obviously,
completely
yeah,
unheard of at that time.
yeah, exactly. And listen, all these years later, they're still in the game and they're not going anywhere. Hey, they take Raw off USA. Okay, now we have SmackDown. So I think the USA Network and for anyone that doesn't know, USA's parent company is NBC, which is now NBC, Peacock, Comcast, whatever you want to call it, but they've always had a strong relationship with WWE, and it basically saved them. And Peacock now is the same partnership, basically, essentially with them. So yeah, that's huge. Speaking of events and getting this out there, the first WrestleMania and the creation of Hulk Hogan, I thought this was very important as well because we all know that you have to have a star. At the time, this was back in the '80s. They wanted the blonde hair, blue eye, just cartoonish character. They rolled with Hulk Hogan, and wow, did it work! and WrestleMania, what we know of WrestleMania now, if it wasn't for the foundation that was laid back then, it wouldn't have existed. So this was huge. I mean, I know they talked about they basically had to mortgage their house just to start
Mhm.
WrestleMania.
Yeah, I've always seen interviews with Shane and Stephanie saying that they nickel and dimed everything to back Vince's dream. And look at it now. It's one of the biggest events. It's their Super Bowl. Super Bowl. So um and the creation of Hulk Hogan is insane to me. Like just how he catapulted everything. And still to this day, he is synonymous with wrestling, very similar to how we think of Stone Cold. It's Hulk Hogan. And he was Vince's right hand guy. And basically, and what I love too is how Hulk was like, a lot of this and everything that I spoke of was all Vince. And, Vince just secretly wanted to be a wrestler too. So, he was just living his dream through Hulk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the other thing that, I definitely think is important to kind of put out there is the fact that, remember when WrestleMania, came out, they had to go the extra mile, if you will. They had to bring in certain celebrities. They had to kind of grab the attention of the general public because no one
Mm-hmm.
really knew what it was. So you could basically say the success of wrestling, specifically for WWE, happened because of WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Because yeah, if that failed, I mean, even Hulk Hogan said, then the company would have been done.
Right.
So they took a chance. Obviously, it worked. And what's funny is even now to this day, a lot of people don't even call it wrestling. Oh, do you watch WrestleMania? They'll just call it WrestleMania. So that it
Yeah.
basically just is synonymous with that. And you
It,
draw, yeah.
it was like their own entity. Like it was completely separate. What I thought was so funny was how they mentioned how they would do those live events, like the big ones, and they would all just pay to go sit down in the stadium and watch it.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. I mean, you do watch parties like that for like the Stanley Cup and World Series and what have
I was
you.
like, I've gone to a bar and done that, so I get it.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. That's for sure. All right, we're gonna move in a little bit. So now we're gonna jump over to the Monday Night Wars. And one thing that they said, and I'm glad that they brought this up: competition brings the best out of everybody.
Mhm.
And because of the competition, and even to this day, the ratings now do not match the ratings back then.
No.
And that happened because of the Monday Night Wars. That was very interesting that they brought up that, listen, billionaire Ted wanted to throw his name in the hat. He had more money than this McMahon at the time, and it worked. We had an episode about who killed WCW, so feel free to rewatch that to know our stance on everything. But yeah, I really do think the synopsis of this segment was basically, hey, look, this brought the best out of everybody.
I love that they touched on this. I love that they had Eric Bischoff on it as well.
Yeah.
Man, the people that they had, this was stacked with some good people. And what I love is how a lot of people were saying that Vince was so upset about how Bischoff was basically poaching his talent, and it was a personal thing. And then immediately before they even switched to the other side, I was like yelling at the TV. I was like, Vince, you did this 10 years ago to the territories. You
Yeah.
basically did this and built your own brand. Now this is payback, basically. This is your karma. But also, this is a wake up call because this is when WWE was in a slump, and it was like get in or get out. And I feel like this was one of the best things that could have ever happened to Vince, because it just catapulted him and his vision to compete and just be a little bit more creative and think more out of the box. So
Yeah.
this was like the best thing ever.
Oh, totally, 100%. And also to kind of double down, and to be honest, even as a fan, I didn't really, I guess, feel the same way that they did, but apparently the general public did when they brought in Mike Tyson. That really changed the game. Of course, me on the outside looking in, I remember he had a very bad reputation at the time. I just thought it was like a
Oh, yeah.
publicity stunt. But wow, did it work? Now, funny enough, back then I was more of a WWF fan than WCW even back then, and I started to legit think that WCW was just getting stale. But the fact that they brought in such a high profile celebrity just goes to show you that, hey, look, you know what Vince touches turns into gold, and that was another golden idea, and it definitely worked.
And everyone, and it wasn't just other wrestlers, it was people in Hollywood, like you said, it was other athletes
Yeah.
that were dropping their own things to go and be on WWF and WCW, because look at Dennis Rodman
Yeah.
and what he did. And it was just crazy. It was just a different time, and I'm just thankful we were alive to watch it live, and
Yep.
it was just the coolest thing. So
Yeah,
I
I
love
agree.
it.
Absolutely. Well, listen, the other thing too, and hindsight's 2020. Again, we don't have to go through the whole thing, but if you think about it like this, two things: the NWO started to get stale, really stale, and they had no
Mhm.
exit strategy whatsoever.
Yeah.
And now in retrospect, what if they killed the NWO? What storylines are you going to give a guy like Hall and Dash? Anyone that left NWO? I don't see much.
And that was the issue with Bischoff, is that was the difference. He was thinking of the now and gimme, gimme, gimme right now. He wanted that instant gratification. He wasn't looking long term in a couple of years, even in a couple of months. He was
Yeah.
just like, let's just deal with what we have and go with it. And then that's what happened. There was no long term goal. So,
No, you're right. And that was from a creative standpoint. I mean, we talked about this before. They kept signing everybody from ECW, from
mhm.
WWF, and they were signing a bunch of people, but they had no idea what they were doing with them. None. And they had the most, I didn't remember a lot of, I stopped watching, so I had no idea they had a pool match where people were jumping in the pool and fighting each other. I just thought that was the dumbest
I
thing.
think that's when they were just like
Yeah.
desperate.
Yeah.
Like they had the Viagra match.
I didn't remember that at all. I didn't. Did you remember that when it aired? I
I
don't.
remember seeing a couple of matches very similar to that, and I'm like, this is so stupid.
Yeah.
And and that's when we realized this was done. And that's when I was staying on USA and watching Raw more than I was Nitro. So
100%. Another thing I want to touch about, because this is basically when kayfabe was broken, if you want.
yeah.
Let's call it that. And I just thought that was just a huge moment, and I loved it personally. I remember actually they aired this on Raw, and I was very confused. But it's funny because I genuinely love Diesel and Razor, and I love Shawn Michaels, and even Triple H. So when they
Mhm.
brought this on, I was just so shocked. And then then it spurred me to start researching what this was. But farewell to the Click. I
Mhm.
thought this was very important to bring up because it was the first. It was such a taboo thing at the time to not let the general audience in on what you know behind the scenes aspect of it, basically breaking kayfabe.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I loved every single moment of it. I thought that this was revolutionary. And Triple H brought up a good point. He said, "Look, times are changing, so why don't we change with it?" And obviously, didn't go over well at the time, but I love this segment.
Oh yeah. I'm a huge fan of the Click. I followed them since day one, and that curtain call was huge. And I love how that was a house show at Madison Square Garden. And I mean, the guy who videotaped it is forever like in
Oh,
our
legend.
hearts for recording that.
Yeah.
And watching it in the back of our heads growing up, we always assume, we're always told this isn't real, this isn't real, but we are so invested in these characters that we love them, and even when they do break character, we're like, is this really happening? It's and at that time it was shocking, and I know a lot of old school wrestlers and a lot of them backstage were like, what are you doing? Y'all are completely destroying, everything that we've built. And they're completely right. Triple H was dead on. It's like, we are fully aware this is a performance. Let's
Yeah,
break the fourth wall and move forward.
absolutely. The other thing they brought up, which I thought was, and I've heard him say it before, but it's so crazy how this whole it basically just turned into what it did. But he said, look, Kevin Scott are gone. Shawn Michaels is the world champion. So who's everything
Yeah,
going to roll on? It's going to roll on
it's
me.
Triple H. Of
When
course he was going to get punished.
yeah.
What do you expect?
And
And
but you know what's funny? I swear to you, I remember because my brother and I used to watch wrestling all the time, and I remember he at the time he was jobbing to everybody. He was having angles with like Henry Godwin slot matches and just ridiculous things, and the gimmick was just awful. The blue
oh yeah,
blood it was just stupid. So, and I remember like turning to my brother and I remember saying, "Hey, can you imagine if Triple H, or if I actually no, can you imagine if Hunter Hearst
Hunter
Helmsley
Hearst
becomes
Helmsley.
yeah Hunter Hearst Helmsley becomes world champion?" And wow. Now here's what's interesting though, and this kind of ties into what I'm about to say. He's supposed to win King of the Ring. He doesn't. Stone
Nope.
Cold does.
So cold.
And if it wasn't for that, would Stone Cold have blown up like he did? I don't know. I don't think so.
And
So
that's why I always say that curtain call is a butterfly effect. Like that was such a pinnacle point in wrestling that if that didn't happen, I don't think the Attitude Era would have exploded the way it did, because if Triple H didn't get in trouble and get that title pulled with Stone Cold becoming King of the Ring and cutting that promo with against Jake, who
well,
knows what would have happened.
absolutely. All right. Speaking of kayfabe, the other segment they brought up, which I just thought was amazing. I'm glad they did
I
it.
love it.
Oh wow, Montreal screw job.
Woo!
Everyone remembers that. So
Damn.
yeah,
I didn't think they were going to spend that much time on it too.
well, it was so monumental. Well, here's the other thing too. So that happened in '97. People were on
Mhm.
the internet, but not really. I like at my house we had AOL, the dial-up
Yeah.
with the crazy noises and stuff like that. So no one really knew much. I didn't know, truthfully, because of Montreal Screwjob. That's when I started reading wrestling websites on a daily basis back then.
Hmm.
So, and that's when I realized because I just thought I had no idea that Bret Hart's contract expired. He was going to jump over. I didn't know the behind the scenes stuff. And they
Yeah.
actually brought this up too. I wasn't alone because of the fact that this basically spurred a bunch of different people to really start to deep dive into what is going on. And that's when you realize, oh, wow, this is, these are the behind the scenes things. So, again, this is another kind of pulling back on the curtain. And I'm so glad that they brought this up.
I know. And everyone gives Brett such a hard time for being a little sensitive about everything, but I get it. He is a tried and true wrestler. He comes from the Hart family. I mean, hell, his dad is Stu Hart.
Oh.
And, when you put in your full body and you are 100% committed to this, he had young kids at the time, always away. He gave everything to Vince, and I get it. I get that he was supposed to drop the title, but the way he was supposed to drop it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the fact that Shawn and Triple H did know, I always believed them because I've seen so many shoot interviews for the past, I don't know how many years, where I have done some digging to be like, tell me the truth. Did you know?
Yeah.
And I believed Shawn. And I was like, okay, he didn't know. Now,
Yeah.
even Triple H was like, yeah, I know. I knew everything and I had to
Well,
lie.
well, well, apparently it was Triple H's idea. So,
Yeah.
yeah, which
I know.
well, you know what? Hats off to the way they formatted the episode. Remember the very beginning with Wendy Richter? They showed how she got screwed over, which I didn't know.
I didn't know that either. I had no idea.
So,
I get it, but I do have to say this. it's characters, it's writing, it's a performance. You can't hold a title, not unless you're Roman Reigns, for that amount of time and not expect to give it up. And I get it, it sucks, but that's just how it goes. That's why I don't understand sometimes where they do throw a fit where they don't want to give up their belt.
Yeah.
Especially Brett. Especially that's the only thing that bothered me. I was like, you're going to a competitor and you're being completely flat out honest. Give it up. Just
Yeah.
drop it. And I know it's Sean, and I know it was the issue with Sunny Days. Oh, that promo with, and I get it, but I don't know. But I'm so glad that they covered it and spent so much time covering this.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of which, rolling this out, listen, R.I.P. Owen Hart. That was so unfortunate. One thing that they actually, so I'm bringing this up because I've heard conflicting reports on this.
What?
Vince is claiming that Owen said he wanted to stay with Vince, but I heard before Vince wouldn't let Owen out of his contract. So this is something I definitely wanted to bring up because if I had to guess, I don't see why Owen would want him to stay because they didn't really do anything with him anyway.
Like I said, and even Brett mentioned that where he was basically made fun of and was like a joke, and he really was towards the end. And you would think that he would if he couldn't punish Brett, he would punish the one closest to him and his little brother.
Yeah, so listen, we're gonna go over something else later on, but there
Yeah.
are some things that are questionable as far as the validity of it. My personal opinion, I think this is lying about this. I don't think Owen wanted to stay.
Yes and no. I'm I'm indifferent. Okay. I feel like he wanted to stay, so he did not have to be in the shadow of Brett. And I felt like this would be his time to be like, okay, I'm different from Bret Hart. I'm no longer Bret Hart's little brother. This is my chance.
Oh.
I feel like that would be the only time for him to stay. I think personally he wanted to leave to go be with Bret.
Yeah, and also he didn't really like wrestling towards the end of his career. He was just really good at it. Like I know he kind of transitioned out. There's another documentary on A&E that happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I remember him and his wife, like he said, yeah, I hate it. I can't stand it. And I know he didn't want to get involved with Deborah as part of that love triangle. So they gave him the
Yeah.
blue blazer. But in addition to that, look, if he really was going to stay because he wanted to get out of the shadow, then I really do think that then Vince should have promised him like a world title shot and to kind of get up there, and he didn't. So I don't know.
To be honest, I don't think Vince was promising anyone
Uh,
dealing with the Hart family anything at
yeah,
that time.
for sure. All right. That being said, going back to Vince's character, talking about the actual character of Vince McMahon, which was definitely perfectly written as far in the event of, hey, if he's a heel, might as well roll with it. I will say they actually pulled that off really well. So I'm glad they brought this up as well.
I completely believed it when I was little. I was like, this asshole. No. No, he just comes off so vile, and he is the boss of all bosses that you cannot stand. And it was complete, utter genius creatively to just make him the worst character. And I think he is one of the worst and the best heels of all time in wrestling history. And he's just so good.
Okay. Do you think he stole that from Eric Bischoff? Like Eric Bischoff claims.
Yes and no. I think you know what? I mean, I think that's what all of this is taking a little bit of everything from everyone and making it your own. I think he was inspired by it and then made his own because he's just got that mind. But yeah, I would give Eric a little bit of credit for it, but not
for being
full
a heel
on.
boss. Sure. But I also listen, they talk about stealing and such in many different regards, like when it comes to music and stuff like that. I really do think two people can have the same idea and they never actually met each other. And I genuinely believe that just because, like, again, there's so many people and so many different
Have
ideas.
completely different results too.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I get it.
yeah, exactly. All right. Speaking of attitude, we're going to talk about the attitude era. Wow. One thing I will say, and it's funny because we're in 2024 where everything is so hypersensitive, but not then. And I do remember this. They were showing as much sex as they possibly could. They were taught, like, they showed way more blood than we'll ever see,
I
way more
loved it.
violence. You love it. Wow, this is coming from a woman, which I think is awesome because I think a lot of times that they obviously had a demo that they were trying to target, but I would say what, look, that particular time in wrestling was kind of for everybody.
Yeah, I was raised with the Attitude Era. I will say it, I am a mark for the Attitude Era. And I, when I go back and I watch it, I'm like, man, we watched some questionable stuff, very uncensored. It was crazy and so entertaining, but that was the time, late 90s, early 2000s. It was like really no holds barred. And my parents didn't care what I watched. And I was like a teenager. So I was like, whatever. And I knew not to do it. And it was a lot of naked women, a lot of questionable innuendos and violence. And I loved it. I think that's what's wrong with me now. No. And
Uh,
still to this day, I'm like, this would never pass right now because people are either too sensitive or it's just not okay.
yeah, 100%. I listen. I'm just like you. To me, it was normal. I always thought, hey, look, this is like toughen up. Like it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
There were movies and TV shows that were just as worse. But listen, where I am going to give Paul Heyman credit because Paul Heyman has said this many times. He said, look, if it wasn't for ECW, the Attitude Era wouldn't have existed. I will give ECW props because I'm ECW guy, but 100%. I definitely think it was not as bad as ECW because they're on a larger network,
Mhm.
but as far as like the naked women and just like, oh my, the Val Venus, wow, I remember it and I just remember like, oh my gosh, that was
They
insane.
did like a castration and
Yeah,
everything. And Triple H like
with
doing
Katie Vick.
whatever with the corpse.
Yeah, Katie Vick. Yeah, that was weird. There's a lot of things I'm sure they would like to forget, but yeah, that would not pass now.
No.
Uh, okay, speaking of which, and they brought this up, and I'm glad that they did. They basically tuned all of that out when the company became public.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say this is actually very good to bring up. But basically, the second that your company goes public, you are under a completely new set of rules.
Yeah.
Even a guy like Vince, egomaniac and all, it is no longer your company. It belongs to the
Mm.
shareholders. So you want to talk about the PC police and everything. So the entire product change. You could argue it's for the better from a morality standpoint or not, but at the end of the day, they talk about one thing, and Vince has mentioned this over and over again. It's all about how much money you make. So going
Right.
public obviously achieve that purpose.
And that's a huge deal for them to go public. That just means that they're just getting bigger and better and they are a full on brand to even be considered for that. So, yeah, we got to calm it down a little bit, but, business is business and money talks. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking, like staying on that subject, there are scandals and there are, steroids and, this is the kayfabe era and, the accusations and stuff like that.
mhm.
Again, they had to clean that up because look, I think at one point in time, especially the good old boys, I mean, you could do all that stuff and no one really cared. The second you go public, no longer the case.
Yeah. What do you think about the steroids?
Uh, so as someone who played sports and such myself, right? You steroids happens all the time. It does.
Yeah.
I don't advocate for it. I don't think you should necessarily do it. It was definitely accepted, especially back in the 80s,
Yeah.
where men were high protein, only going heavy, forget cardio, forget vegetables, just take steroids and lift. And that was kind of the culture back then, not just in wrestling. I mean, you're talking about football and bodybuilding and
Mhm.
everything. But again, the second you go public, can't happen. They
Yeah.
also talked about that with like, Phil, was it Rusnak, and how he kind of exploited that, and they kind of
Yeah.
had the trials and stuff like that. So yeah, not surprised. I kind of was under the assumption that everyone was taking steroids. To this day, a lot of them are. I mean, you just have to be realistic about it.
Yeah, I think that was just something that was just unspoken and obvious. I felt like the especially the men were just under a lot of pressure to look a certain way. And
Yeah.
even though they weren't physically or verbally told to do it, it was kind of insinuated, hey, you need to look this way, do what you need to do it. I mean, look at and it was like during like the bodybuilding era, so everyone looked that way. So
Yeah. Absolutely. One thing I also want to bring up, and I'm glad that they did, because they became public and they couldn't do the bra and panties matches and stuff like that. Because again,
mhm.
women back then were just sex objects. I remember
Yeah.
like their matches at most were just 3 to 5 minutes. It was almost as if they weren't wrestling.
Oh
And
yeah.
and I will say, WWE has stepped up bigger than ever with women in wrestling now. There are actual storylines. There are competitors. There's depth on the roster. Back then, there was like 10 of them, maybe. Now it's no
Right.
longer the case. So hats off to them for that.
Absolutely. And then, being a female viewer, just growing up with it, I didn't really have a lot. And that's why, still to this day, my favorite wrestler is still Sensational Sherry because she was a nutcase, but she also wrestled.
Sure.
And, even Medusa. But during the Attitude Era, where it was just where more women were in it, but they were always naked. And I love Stacy Keibler and Tori Wilson. And, and then there were people like how they did Deborah and Sable, and they just over sexualized them.
Yeah.
And even though they were athletes, you didn't know that because they wouldn't allow them to do it. But now, luckily, even with Stephanie stepping up for the women's revolution, like just
Well,
getting actual women in there in the ring.
okay, I want to touch upon that too. Look, at your core, if you're the head man, you're allowing this to go on. With all these accusations of sexual misconduct, I mean, they kind of are congruent. You kind of have to believe some of it, because honestly, I got to be honest. If you're someone that is okay with that on camera, yeah, you're gonna believe some of those claims.
Yeah. And in the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, some of these are rumors. There's a lot of it that's going to be overly done. And there's going to be people that just come out just to say that, they just want to be a part of the complaint.
Exactly, it's a
Um,
cash grab. Also, I mean, I'm not gonna deny.
but there's got to be some truth to some of it.
I think so.
And I think we can all agree that anything along those lines is unacceptable. No one should be pressured to be doing anything to be guaranteed a position in a job or anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, but that kind of tells you if they were doing things over the top and even people were like, whoa, this is really, over the line, you know, it makes you question it.
100%. Another thing that I'm so glad that Christopher Nowitzki was brought on. They talked about CTE.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, looking over and over again. I wanted to bring this up. Watching Chris Benoit doing the diving headbutt over and over and over again. Now that we
Yeah.
know what CTE is, wow,
Yeah.
that was scary. And what? Listen, I will say this, you know, now and forever. Anyone that's in any type of physically enduring profession, and in this case, professional wrestling, I don't think you should be doing it for that long. And this is about safety. We had a episode about hanging up the boots, and this is congruent with that. And what I simply mean is, if you are at a place where you're starting to feel these symptoms, please find something, like, please get help and please find something else to do, because I'm so glad that Christian Winsey came on.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that is not really touched on, even though this is a thing and we know what happened. And as much as it is a very sensitive subject, this is for their health. And it's not just for wrestlers. It could be anybody, like you said, in any kind of physical activity. And when you are getting hit that hard, having multiple concussions, what do you think else can happen besides the physical? It's going to, impact you mentally and emotionally. And, you get hit so many times, it can really screw with you. And look what happened. And I'm going to say it, I was kind of surprised that Steve Austin said what he said
Yeah.
when he said he didn't believe in it. And I don't know if I agree with that or not. I was just kind of shocked that he said it, knowing, um, I mean, he had an injury himself actually by Owen.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm like, you've seen so many people get hurt, and this is just something that caught me off.
Yeah, me
You
same here.
know,
I didn't listen. I love Steve Stone Cold for what he did, and I understand it's like a tough man sport, but
yeah,
no, I'm gonna go with medical science on this. So, and they
yeah,
said that Chris Benoit's brain was the worst they've ever seen for anyone that they've actually
I
studied.
believe it too.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, listen.
Yeah.
Last segment, life after life after Vince. They asked the question, "What would you say Vince's legacy is?" What is your response to that?
Okay, in response to what everybody else said, the fact that all of them paused got me. Their reaction was not what I expected.
Same here.
I thought they were going to either rip him or they were going to praise him. Tony Atlas was just straight up the entire time. Um, but for me, I think it's a love hate kind of thing.
Same.
And this is where we have to separate Vince, the businessman, and family man, and just whoever Vince McMahon Jr. is compared to Vince, the character, the heel. And I think that's where we're thinking of one person. What he is I think he is the foundation of what wrestling entertainment is. He has built this brand, and I believe he deserves so much credit for what he's created. He has put a lot of his money, his time, friendships, and family, you know, on the back burner for this dream and for this brand. And, um, you know, he's a fantastic promoter. He's an entertainer. He's a creator. He deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah, correct. I'm same with you. Love hate. We are actually running out of time. We had a lot to say, and this was a great episode. What did you think? Please DM us at the Shoots and Ladders. Did you agree, disagree? What would you like to add? For talking points, please like, share, and subscribe on both YouTube and Spotify. Once again, my name is Jason.
I'm Desiree Josen.
All right, until next time, have a wonderful day.
Bye, friends.